there's no use getting strong at the wrong exercises. Now, that's something that might sound like a contradiction. It might sound like a contradiction, particularly when I try to tell people that strength is strength, and generally a big, strong person is a big, strong person. And that would normally be true. In other words, if you're a novice lifter or even an intermediate, if you get stronger at any big movement, it tends to carry over pretty well to other movements, right? Most of you have observed this. Unfortunately, that isn't always true for advanced lifters. And it's an expression that I've heard Louis Simmons say before quite a few times. And it's one of those things that I scoff at. I scoffed at a little bit because I didn't understand at certain points in my training career, my coaching career, things like that. And this is a man who I normally like and respect and consider him to be probably one of the greatest coaches of all time. You guys can disagree with that all you want. But that being said, it's one of those things that I didn't always understand, because it's also a guy who's like, all these things carry over. You just get strong at maxing on 30 different exercises. That's great for your max effort work. But I think what people need to remember there is that getting strong oftentimes is a case of getting stronger with your volume, right? What are you doing to make yourself stronger? Because max work is really just displaying strength. It's testing strength. It doesn't always build strength. It does, but it's to a much, much lesser degree. And I realized this more and more as time went on. And I'll give you guys myself as a perfect example, because it's something that people can watch over time. They can document. They can see it. Right? And I don't have footage from in my 20s. And I think that's one of the things that gets lost on the younger generation. The idea that people could have lifted things and didn't film it, doesn't make sense, right? Because you guys have grown up with portable cameras. 20 years ago, there was no such thing. There was no such thing as a camera phone. It didn't exist. Very few people owned a video camera of any type. It was rare. And if you did, it was a really crappy webcam on your computer that wasn't portable, and it was horrifically low quality. It looked like a potato. So, for example, we talk about overhead press strength versus bench strength. Because a lot of times, a lot of coaches will say, well, if you work on your overhead press, your bench will go up. But you'll also see a lot of coaches who say, well, no, it seems to be the case that the incline does for some people, but the overhead press doesn't for everyone. That it tends to be one or the other, just using as an example. And for me, the incline doesn't seem to carry over much either. Possibly, but not to any degree that I can tell. Maybe eventually it will, and I'll do more of it. But they'll say that, and it does seem to be true for some people. But in my case, I go back to my 20s, I did not have a particularly strong overhead press. I don't think I overhead pressed more than maybe 200, 205 at any point in my 20s. And I won't say what I benched in my late 20s because everyone will call me a liar. And that's just the way the internet is, so we'll just leave it alone. All I will say is that based on pictures and things that people have seen, I had more muscle in my late 20s than I do today. That's not in question. I had bigger triceps and bigger pecs. I had a bigger bench than I do today. That shouldn't be a controversial statement. Most people can grasp that. Okay, I was bigger and stronger than I am now in my 40s versus when I was in my 20s. Before I got sick, spent a year in bed, lost everything, had to rebuild, had to learn to walk again, all that. Which you guys have seen kind of the documentation of on here. So I was stronger. A lot stronger on my bench. I was weaker on my overhead press though, because I didn't put a focus on the overhead press until later in life. I didn't care about it. I didn't train it. Now, what did you guys see me do a few years ago, right? I did my whole Bulgarian training. I started filming at home, but I got my press to almost 225. When I was training at 24-Hour Fitness, the nearest one to me, it had, I believe, 8 racks. I trained there. I could go there at 4 in the morning. I could train. They had 8 racks, whatever I needed. I got my overhead press up to like 220. That was my best ever. Okay, my best ever in my life. Then I got my press up to 225 here on camera. And I want people to notice that my bench press did not go up. When I was in the UK, what's the best bench anyone remembers seeing me do? 331 in comp. I was oftentimes only doing 325, and my best bench during the whole time I was pressing 225 was only 335. Now keep in mind, I haven't had an overhead press of about 190. Taking my press from 190 all the way up to 225 didn't really add anything to my bench press. Nothing. And when I mean nothing, I'm talking even my rep work. I got to where I could do a triple at one time with 205. I could do a triple with more than my previous 1 rep max on the press. My bench only went up at most 5 pounds during that entire time. Okay. Same thing came back around. I did tons of rep work for the press. Helped build my shoulders up, probably my upper chest, maybe my triceps, maybe the long head of my triceps. I feel like the long head of my triceps has grown. The other heads haven't grown enough. They're a weak link. They're a problem in my bench. My pecs aren't big enough. My delts, front delts got bigger and stronger. Got back up to where I could press 225 again. And I do lots and lots of volume on the press. Did anyone see my bench go up? My bench was still fairly stagnant during that time. And all those months, put over 50 pounds on my squat, over 50 pounds on my deadlift. Tons of overhead pressing. Bench pretty much stayed fairly stagnant. And every time I notice that it went up, it's when I focused on other exercises. And every time I focus a lot on the overhead press, what happens? My bench doesn't go up. So I'm one of those people that for me, there's no overlap. And here's what I would say. A good way to gauge if an exercise is truly benefiting you, other than just putting hypertrophy on, because again, sometimes the hypertrophy is not in the right spot in a muscle. In other words, there's multiple heads to your delt. There's more going on with your pec. Your pec has an upper, middle, and lower. Tricep has 3 heads. Certain heads are more important than others to a big exercise. And here's what I'm going to point out. If your 10 rep maxes on a supplemental lift keep going up, going up, going up, and your maxes don't go up on the lifts that you care about, you're probably not getting that much out of it, right? So in other words, if you take your hip thrust from 350 for sets of 10 all the way up to 425 for sets of 10, and your squat barely goes up or stagnates, you're personally not getting much out of that for improving your squat. You need to find a different lift. If the overhead press goes up, 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 over time you increase your 10 rep maxes, 10 rep sets by 10 pounds, and then your max goes up by 15, but your bench doesn't move, you're not getting benefits from it. Same thing with quad exercise. That's one of the big things I see. And I'm not saying for some people quads are not a weak link in the squat, but I've got my squat past 500 sometimes with long phases of no real quad work other than just squatting and box squatting, right? A lot of times guys are like, well, I want to do a bunch of leg presses to work on my quads, leg extensions or front squats or whatever it is they think they're going to do, and they spend a lot of time doing it, but then their squat doesn't go up. Their squat doesn't go up because they spend a lot of time getting strong at the wrong exercises. Okay? And surprisingly enough, most guys out there, if you do enough actual training volume, your quads being the weak link in your squat is usually relatively rare. It's usually other muscles that are a problem. And I'm not saying quad weaknesses don't exist, particularly for some advanced and elite lifters, they do. But the majority of guys out there who are coming in thinking they do a bunch of extra quad work probably don't. You probably need stronger hips. You probably need to thicken your hamstrings. You probably need more T-spine. You probably need stronger glutes. There's a lot of other things going on. Probably not your quads. It might be. But here's the thing. If you come in and you spend 3 months doing a bunch of quad work, and let's say you neglect your posterior chain because of the volume is being spent on quads, and your squat doesn't go up or it stagnates, then you wasted a bunch of time getting strong at the wrong exercises. So it's good for us to assess these things. It's good for us to be honest. Look at the exercises that you're focusing on, and then check and see if you're getting stronger at the lifts that you care about. And I'm not saying the overhead press, for example, isn't a lift that we should care about. We should. I like the press. It's one of the big four. But it may not carry over. The things that make you stronger at the press, which might be a lot more delt, front delt, side delt, long head of the tricep, all those things, they may not carry over to your bench press at all. They may not address the weak links in your bench, and you might find that your press excels and your bench doesn't go up. But by that same token, some people who maybe have a major front delt weakness, it might improve their bench. But we need to be aware of these things, and we need to look at how the assistance movements and the accessory movements that we do, we need to be honest with ourselves about how they're impacting our big lifts. Because the reality is, if they aren't making them go up, they're probably not increasing your overall strength because they're not addressing your overall weak links. And anytime you find the 2 or 3 weakest links in your entire body, even if you're really strong, and you make them bigger and stronger, your overall strength tends to go up. When we focus on the things that we already are good at, that aren't weaknesses too much, a lot of times our strength doesn't go up as much as we would expect because we still have our weak links. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.